Hi, Dana. Thanks
Hello,
for
Linda.
coming for our interview.
Thank
I
you.
absolutely wanted to interview you because you're running for council at large, councilman at large.
Yes.
And I am so glad you are because you know everything by now. You've been doing so much volunteer work and so much with so many different groups. I never seen anybody just keep doing stuff and you're working at the same time.
Yep.
So I am so glad you're running for
Thank you.
city council.
Thank you.
And so tell us all a little bit about, why you decided to do that.
Well, I decided I was looking at the filing page the night before the last day that filing was to be done. One of the things that I have always been objected to is when there's a sole candidate and they're running unopposed for an election. At that time, Holly Huffman, who is now my opponent for the general election, was the only person who had filed for the at-large position. And I've been of the opinion for decades and decades and decades that the form of government that we have is a participatory government. It's not a spectator sport. So in a sense, I kind of blew my stack, took some of my meager funds, applied, put out the filing fee, and then subsequently there was two other individuals that ended up doing running for the same position for the primary, one of them who dropped out a few days after the filing week was over. The secondary reason for doing this was because for a number of decades there's people that I've known on and off in various places around the United States who had always kind of nudged me towards perhaps running for some kind of elected office. And the debate in my own mind was whether I could be more effective as me outside of the system, so to speak, working with non-governmental agencies, or whether it would be better off to be on the inside. Lastly, after the last year and a half to 2 years of dealing with the homelessness issue in Bellingham and in Whatcom County, and also the environmental issues that we're all going to have to face, plus the issues dealing with undocumenteds in this county, since we are a border county on the northern border between Canada and the U.S. I was, to put it bluntly, appalled by the lack of urgency and in some cases the obstruction that was being done by various governmental agencies on any of a number of issues having to do with that. So if you put that all together, that's part of the reason why I'm running for city council at large.
Okay. Well, I know you've been doing an awful lot as you get ready to run for a council. Well, as you're running for council, and before you were running for council, could you tell us some of those things you've been active in?
Well, let's take the most important issue for me is the climate emergency that we're in. It has become very apparent based upon the report that was issued by the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change from the UN last year, plus the National Climate Assessment by our own federal government, plus various things that having to do with the Washington State Department of Ecology, all kinds of nonprofits, that we are in fact in a climate emergency. And there is no longer any excuse for denying the fact that we're in that, and we are going to have to transform Bellingham and the surrounding area, because the climate doesn't recognize boundaries. What we do here affects folks outside of Bellingham. What they do affects us, and we're going to have to come to some kind of concerted effort. To kind of give you an idea of where I'm approaching this from, when our parents, grandparents, or great-grandparents, depending on what your age is, were growing up in the 1930s and the 1940s, they faced two great challenges that were affecting their way of life. One of them was the Great Depression. The other one was World War II. But that was affecting their way of life. Now we're at a point where our way of life is actually affecting and could possibly jeopardize the existence of the human species. So we need to transform that way of life to something that is more ecologically sustainable, and whatever it's going to take to do that. But the first and foremost thing is that we need to get off of fossil fuels as quickly as possible and completely.
Okay, well, you definitely know what you're fighting for.
Yes.
So, with a lot of passion. I see you putting in a lot of time doing it from various angles, helping different groups. So, I'm glad you have it all covered, Dana.
Thanks.
Yeah. So, tell us what you intend to do as council person.
Well, it's a twofold thing. The council is responsible for implementing policy, approving the budget, and then the mayor and whoever whether it's he or she, and the administration is responsible for implementing whatever those approved policies and budget are. So, if you look at it as a twofold thing, number one is to be part of that team of 7 individuals on the council that's going to review and make the tough decisions that have to be made about what policy is going to drive us for the next decade, if not longer, regardless of whether any one of us is still on the council even in 10 years. The first and foremost thing, again, is going to have to do with the climate emergency. The climate action plan, which was updated and approved by the existing council last year in 2018, is being reviewed by a task force that the city council asked to be put together. And they're due to report their findings and their recommendations and their suggestions on November the 18th at a city council meeting. And the incoming city council, as of the first of the year, is going to have to turn that into actual policy and institute it in whatever form that they can with the urgency that's required. Secondarily, there's the issues of homelessness, housing affordability. As we know, it's not only affecting Bellingham, but it's affecting basically both coasts of the United States, plus probably somewhere in the middle. And we need to rein in the abuse, and I think that's probably the proper word, the abuse by property managers and landlords, where they, with impunity, can turn around and raise rents however they want to, because on the state level in the state of Washington, rent control, among other things, is prohibited. So we need to push the state legislature to rescind that, put in a bunch of other activities that we can do to bring the housing costs under control. And it's not just rental properties, but it's also single family homes or duplexes, or whatever building that you happen to want to build or be in. Thirdly, cost of living. Cost of living for too many people in this city doesn't meet what they need to cover the basics. We've got a substantial number of people that are living literally paycheck to paycheck. I'm one of them. I cannot afford a place to live within Bellingham or the county, even though I have been working full-time at the local hospital. Just trying to save up the $2,000 to $4,000 that's required just to get into an apartment is beyond my reach at the moment. So we need to take a look at things like what the minimum wage is, and other policies that's going to help individuals that are not making enough money. Lastly, the issue about undocumented. Too many of the individuals in this county, because we are a border county with the northern border of the United States between us and Canada, are at the mercy of Customs and Border Protection and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And while there may not be necessarily the abuse that we have heard about and seen that's going on the southern border, there is a detention facility in this county, although it's outside of Bellingham, where we don't know what's happening to these people after raids are occurring. Coming across the border, not in the proper way, is a misdemeanor. By federal law, it is a misdemeanor the first time that they actually do that. If they do it a second time, then technically it could be turned into a felony. But in either case, abuse of the individuals is a violation of human rights under international and domestic law. And the current federal government is totally out of control, and we need to push back against them by declaring Bellingham a sanctuary city, now that essentially the state of Washington is a sanctuary state because of the legislation that was passed in the last session at the earlier part of this year. And so these are a bunch of policy things that I want to work on. But last but not least, to the best of my knowledge, there has never ever been somebody of lower economic classes that's actually sat as an elected on the city council. So the individuals that are sitting there, as well intentioned as they are, even if they have lived through that experience in the past, are not living that experience right now. They have their own place that they can go home to comfortably every night, not have to worry about where they're going to sleep, about whether their stuff is going to be taken, whether they're going to be attacked in some way, shape, or form. And unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of ethnic minorities that have been represented on the council in the past. There have been a few, but not as many as probably what's reflective of the city itself. So I want to be able to create a system where it doesn't matter who has a concern, a suggestion, a positive comment, but they feel comfortable coming to the city and engaging in the participatory government that we all need to take part in.
Wow, I like that. I really like that. I really like the idea that there are so many possibilities for housing that are actually there. And having volunteered with Homes Now, I've had quite a bit of experience with interviewing homeless people, as well as people who are about to be homeless, and people who are working with them, trying to help as volunteers and as city people on the council, and going to the meetings and so on. And you've been there too. We've both been speaking up at city council and also county council.
Right.
And so I've got to mention Homes Now, Not Later, has just made an amazing contribution, and their success is partly due to you and me as volunteers,
Right.
and all the others that stepped up, which were so many. And we see that it's possible to do lots of things. Now, right now, I have friends who are thinking about cooperative houses, turning their homes into cooperative houses. And so as council person,
Mm-hmm.
I would come and be talking to you and the council and asking them if we could do what it takes to make it possible to have cooperative houses.
Yes, and I agree. We need to look at every possible type of housing arrangement, regardless of what's going on. And some of that will require zoning, rezoning of areas. Some of it will be changing rules, like the rule of three, where supposedly there's a city ordinance that says that if you have 4 or more unrelated individuals, they cannot reside in the same dwelling. So we need to, blow that out, because we know for a fact that many property managers and landlords under the table are allowing 4 or more college students in the area that are unrelated to live in the same dwelling. So, if you're going to pass an ordinance, either enforce it or get rid of it, because it's not practical. It begs the question of things like, why don't we have boarding houses any longer within the confines of Bellingham? The tiny home scenario not only is a transitional thing for individuals who are not experiencing to a large extent the mental health or self-medication issues that some of the homeless experience. I mean, these are individuals in the tiny homes that are trying to get their lives back on track. Some of them are employed, some of them are looking for work, some of them have been transitioned to more permanent housing. But the point is to get them safe and secure so that they can go do that. But if you think about it for a minute, tiny homes with a centralized kitchen and restroom facilities and everything else is nothing more than a modern day boarding house. It's just that the bedrooms, which are the tiny homes, happen to be detached from the central facility, and they may be making their own meals, as opposed to whoever owned the boarding house prior to World War II, actually providing 3 meals a day. But essentially it's the same thing. So why aren't we allowing more tiny home villages or actual boarding houses, and these are just examples, within the confines of Bellingham. I'm going to suggest to you and everybody else that the days of single family dwellings is probably coming to an end as far as everybody either wanting one or attempting to achieve one, because with the prices of market rate single family dwellings now having reached $500,000 within the confines of Bellingham and just a little bit less than that in the county, not everyone is ever going to be able to afford a single family dwelling. And secondarily, there's a lot of people that don't even want to be in one. They would prefer to be in an apartment or a duplex or triplex or a tiny home, or maybe live in their RV in a safe space, because that's the type of living arrangement that they want to have. And so what I would suggest to you also is that just because a particular housing type may not be acceptable to you, it's acceptable to whoever it is that chooses to live that particular way. And as long as they're not creating a disturbance, and as long as they're not creating a mess, we should honor their decision to live how it is that they want to live. For the 25 or 30% of the homeless or unhoused population that's got those self-medication and mental health issues, of course, we need to ramp up even further above and beyond what's already been done, the services to help them get back on track, and put them in spaces where they can be not abused and perhaps recover. Unfortunately, sometimes, no matter what you offer to individuals, what they choose to do with those offers is their business. Some people are never going to be able to recover. But they should have the dignity of being able to live in a space so that whatever remaining time that they have, and in whatever shape that they are particularly in, that they can, pass through the rest of their life with a dignified set of circumstances. It's a very complex issue. It also revolves around how much people get paid, and there's a huge imbalance between what the average worker is making and what the cost of living is. And I would say to individuals who own properties, you supposedly live in a community, okay? And the community is comprised of all kinds of individuals, all kinds of economic circumstances, all kinds of professions, family groups, family arrangements, groups of people that are living together that are not necessarily related by law or biologically. And as a community, we need to come together and allow individuals to live how they choose to do so, again, as long as they're not being disturbing